Just to reiterate Jill's comments, please do enter your questions as they come to you. We'll be stopping at several points during the presentation to take questions, so please get those cards and letters in as soon as possible. Our agenda is pretty simple this morning. We're going to start off with just a very brief slide presentation showing you an overview of the version 9.1 features. Then we'll move into the actual demo to show you these features, and then we'll stop and take whatever questions and feedback you'd like to ask and pass on to us. As always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. We like to think of ourselves as a very customer-driven organization. So if you do have requests or ideas for additional features for future versions, please do let us know that, as well as questions about the new version 9.1. We're very excited about version 9.1 because it continues the theme that we began in version 9 of really enhancing the user interface generation capability in Iron Speed Designer. As you may recall, version 9.0 introduced mobile application pages, and we're extending that in version 9.1 with a whole set of modern page layouts. So you'll see these layouts in version 9.1 separate from the classic themed layouts that we've had in version 9.0 and previous. You'll find that in version 9.1, the modern layouts have a different page layout. Things are positioned in different places on the generated application screens. You'll also find that we do a much better job, I think, at displaying labels and organizing fields and so forth. So let me show you a few things. You can see the basic page here. This is a master detail page. You'll notice that instead of having a set of buttons and filters and so forth at the top, those are actually underneath some pop-up panels called actions and filters. We also have a search bar here. We've also introduced a new gallery page. Gallery pages are great for things like product showcases or galleries of employees, things like that where you have a strong visual element that you want to show. A gallery page is certainly not for everything, and it certainly doesn't replace a standard table page, but a gallery page is great for an overview where you want to use a visual introduction. As I mentioned, we have both pop-up filters and pop-up action panels. The filters panel, basically when you click that, shows you the filters and any sort by that you want. You click go and you can reset just by clicking the reset button. Similarly, on the pop-up action panel, we have all of the buttons, all of the features that you're used to in previous versions, but they're just one click away underneath the action panel. This makes the screens a whole lot simpler and easier to use, especially for first-time users. We've added a lot of intelligence into how we generate tabs in tab panel arrangements. So just by way of comparison, in version 9, you will see the orders problem where there may be multiple foreign key references into different tables, but in often cases you'll have the same table referred to by different foreign keys, just with different constraints. Well, we simplify that now so there's only one orders. Of course, you can add others back from the tool box. It's very, very simple. Just drag those onto your page. And we arrange them alphabetically and just in general do a lot better job of cleaning up those tabs. We've added quite a bit of application performance improvements. The page load times are a lot faster, especially when you have big data sets. We've introduced a selectable paging method for SQL Server. That's a mouthful. What does that mean? Well, basically it means that you've got two different ways that you can instruct your application to use on a page-by-page or panel-by-panel basis for how you display data from a particular table. Microsoft SQL Server happens to have some optimizations built in using a row num facility. You can select that option, or you can select what we call our traditional triple somersault method. The best way to determine which is the better way is simply to try both. You can set those through the Data Access Layer Databases tab, set it, and do a little bit of timing and pick the one that works best. And finally, we've tested Iron Speed Designer and optimized for very large data sets. I don't know that we've tested on 1 billion records, but we have tested on a data set that's about 500 million records. And so in displaying a table with 500 million records, we're now at sub-second performance. So the page pops up in under a second, and you can go page, 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 and going from page to page, even with a half of a billion records, is well under a second to go from one page to the next. So it's very, very zippy. In terms of Designer itself, we've actually improved its performance as well. We scan schemas and build applications faster. And so accordingly, working with large schemas of 1,000 tables or more is not as much of a problem as it was in the past. We're much more judicious in how we do that. In particular, we only link tables that the application needs, so you won't have a bloated data access layer. It's pretty svelte, including only those tables and views that ultimately it needs to create your application based on what you have selected for pages and so forth. And you'll notice that we've added a handful of other interesting features like this one in the application generation options, where you can select fields to exclude from your pages. So if you don't want audit trail fields to show up on your pages, you can exclude those by default. They're still there and handled, just not displayed. With that, I'm going to turn it now over to Jim Dempsey, who will show you Iron Speed Designer version 9.1 in some detail. Jim?
Thanks, Alan. Okay, well, you thought we were done with slides, but we've got one last slide I'm going to show you, and this is just going to give you a summary of what I'm going to cover in the demo here. Most of the time will be spent on the modern user interface. There we are. Sorry about that. Most of the time I'll spend showing you the modern user interface that Alan talked about. We'll go through the application wizard where we've made the changes to support that. And while we're building the application in 9.1, I'm going to take a quick stroll down memory lane and look at the apps in version 9 and 8. And you'll see the differences. And that's where you really appreciate the modern app. So, and then we'll do a detailed review of the modern app itself in 9.1. And I'll also cover briefly some of the application options that we've offered new in 9.1 that are related to modern themes. Also the field exclusion, I'll point that out to you where that is. There's also an ignore global where clause thing I'll talk about a little bit, but I won't demonstrate that. That will be a small customization. And there'll be a few miscellaneous improvements we'll talk about, some UI changes in Panel Wizard, and inline SQL using that by default. And then something that'll be really fun is we're going to do a performance comparison, head-to-head, version 9.1 versus 9.0, which is faster in creating an application with a large number of tables and executing a show table page where there are many records. So that's the agenda. Let's jump right in and go into Iron Speed 9.1 here. And I'll be creating a new application with the application wizard and just giving you facts along the way. And please submit your questions along the way, and we'll answer them at the end. But I will finish the demonstration first. Okay. So, oops, that is version. Looks like that's version 9.0. Let's see. There we go. There's version 9.1. If you're familiar with 9.0, you'll notice there's a big difference that we have a thumbnail that's pretty much the full size of the wizard, rather than showing you multiple style thumbnails at the same time. So you can get a better look at it. And I'm not going to get into the details of the thumbnail. We'll look at the pages themselves as I create the application. What I want to emphasize here in the redesign of this step is that we have the styles now in two groups, modern styles and classic styles. The classic styles are all the ones that have existed before 9.1, including SharePoint. So SharePoint styles are considered classic. You can see they all have their own previews here, their thumbnails here. So modern styles are available only in 9.1 and higher, although 9.1 can create classic applications as well. So key thing to be aware of is that these styles, these two families, modern and classic, they are very different, as Alan said, in terms of the layout. And we do not change your layout after you create an application. That means after you create your application, the family has been chosen. You cannot change the family later. So if it's modern, it stays modern. So that applies to migrated applications as well as new applications. Okay, so here you can see the old classic styles. again, which we continue to support. You can create new applications with them if you prefer them. So there's about 32 of them, and then here's the modern ones. So of course I'll create a modern application. The modern ones have a wine theme for the names. Cabernet, Chardonnay have vertical menus by default, and Pinot and Zinfandel have horizontal menus. You can change the menu orientation using the options in the AppGen options. We'll look a little more in there later. So I'm just going to create the Cabernet style. And if you look at the Iron Speed website recently, you may recognize that it's very similar to the Iron Speed website, and that we've made the two as close as we can. Okay, so I'm going to just create, this time around, a very simple Southwind sample application. And the other area you'll notice changes in the application wizard is in the pages step. Two things. One is a subtle thing that you may not notice at first, and that is the thumbnails on the right. They're a little bit different. To reduce the size of the Iron Speed Designer download, we've set up the thumbnail so that there's just two sets of them. There's one set for modern and one set for classic. So do not expect the thumbnails to be different for Cabernet and Chardonnay. The thumbnails are there to show you the difference between the types of pages. So an edit table clearly is different from an edit record. So that's just one thing to be aware of. And the other thing is that we've changed the page types shown in the list. We've consolidated the emailable and printable ones, both of them, the record and the table pages. So we've reduced the number there. We found they were essentially the same. So to try and keep the number smaller, we've consolidated them. And also you'll see the new gallery style. Now the key thing with the gallery style is that this is available in both classic and modern applications. So if you're migrating an older application, you can certainly add gallery pages to it, just like you could add mobile pages to a pre-9.0 application. So, and I'll demonstrate the gallery feature in just a little bit. Another thing we've changed here is the default pages that we create for you. The workflow pages are no longer created by default. We found many customers were not using those. And the mobile, as cool as it is, there's still many customers that are not ready to move toward mobile. So 9.0 highlighted that new feature, but generally, after we highlight a new feature, the subsequent release will, we'll turn it off. It's not used all the time, but mobile is there. So just be aware of that. If you do not like the default pages created for you, you can easily change those in the application generation options. And this one I'm actually point out real quickly, pages to create for both web pages and mobile pages. It's in there. And again, we'll come in here later on. But what I want to do now is get this application building. So I'm going to actually create all the different page types that are available and do it for all the tables. So this way we'll have anything we could possibly want for demonstration. It'll be there built for us. And this will be pretty quick. It's a small Southwind database, which you get with Iron Speed Designer. I'm going to do multilingual. I'll select Dutch. I do not know a word of Dutch, so don't expect anything there, but I do want to show one thing in the user interface there. And I'm just going to create a simple website, C#, .NET 3.5. So no big surprises there. And there we go. We're going to be building the application. That'll just take a minute or two. But what I want to do now is I want to switch gears and go back and quickly review previous versions of applications created with Iron Speed Designer. So here's 8.0, and it's using the classic Everest page style, which actually goes back, I think, at least 8 years. So it was really good in its day, but as the years have gone on, we've seen areas that we could improve. So the things that you'll see are that, well, one is that we have a search area that's always at the top, and we know some customers prefer that, but it really does make a lot of stuff, a lot of complexity overall on the page. Particularly in that area, if you look at the buttons here, we call this the 747 cockpit here, where we've got a whole bunch of buttons here in the row, all these different operations and all types of pagination type of controls. And the reason why we put all these out there is so that you know the features that we have in the product. But there's a combined effect where it's just a lot visually to absorb. There's a lot of lines and extra buttons on the rows. So that's something that we look to simplify in the 9.0 release. So if you use 9.0, the mono page style, you'll see that we've improved the page style a lot there, and that's without layout changes. So I'm just going to now jump ahead to 9.0. And let's see. Well, we've got our 9.1 application here that's just completing, so it wants to kind of show itself, but we're not ready for that just yet. So here I have, let's see, this should be 9.0. Now the monopage style, no, that's actually, don't look at that, that's 9.1. The monopage style is it's a cleaner, more elegant style. There's the lines there's fewer of those, and we've also made adjustments with the buttons. So you'll see that there's less of that in the pagination. So here we go. Here's Mono, and you'll see that the menus don't have as many lines around them. The same thing with the rows, and the buttons also on the rows have been de-emphasized. There's fewer buttons up here, and the pagination has been simplified. So Mono was a big step forward in 9.0, although the focus was on web or mobile. So there's still one thing, though, that we were not able to address here in 9.0 that is a big emphasis in 9.1, and that is the horizontal scrolling. If we take a database table that has more columns than that, say 20 or 100, which is typical in the field, what happens is we have a column for every field, and as we scroll, we can pretty much be navigating to the end of the time there if we've got a lot of fields. And we really saw with the mobile version in 9.0 that scrolling in 2 dimensions, horizontally and vertically, was something that you really did not want to do a lot of. So that's something we set out to improve in 9.1. So now, without further ado, as they say, let's move right on to 9.1 and look at the improvements. So here's my 9.1 application built with Cabernet, and you'll see all of, right away the visual elements that Alan talked about. You'll see that we have the Actions pop-up window that has buttons in it. We've added a few buttons back in here since we have plenty of space in the pop-up. You'll see the Adobe Acrobat icon that people have been asking for. All these are configurable in the application generation options. You just have to know to look in there. And lots of times the new evaluators don't know about them, or if you know the options, you still have to find them in there. So we've changed that. You can customize the layout. Everything I'm showing you, you can pull the buttons out if you want. So don't feel that you have to do everything exactly as it is here. And here's the filters as well. So they're tucked away everywhere except the workflow pages. I'll give a quick peek at a workflow page in a minute. So this is what Alan spoke of before, that you have a reset filters button, your sorting, and your filters. One thing to be aware of here is that we decided out of the box that all the filters would not have auto post back, that we wanted to make it consistent regardless of how many filters there were and allow you to filter on multiple fields. So you select your filter values and then you press go and it filters. Notice there's a little check mark there to tell you that the filters are on. So that's a very handy feature. Let me just reset. So that's the new filters. You also notice the new search control. The functionality is as before, but it looks very different. And that's what 9.1 was all about. It was the aesthetics. There's been a lot of focus on that. Before I forget, though, let me just take a quick look at one of the workflow pages and show you the contrast. This is an area where we did leave things more conventional. So if you go to a workflow page, you'll see here that the filters and the search is up here, but the filters are in the traditional location, which really makes sense for workflow because you want to have easy access continuously to that information. So that has more of a classic layout. Okay, back to the show table page. Other things I want to point out, you'll notice that the menus they're very nice here in 9.1. You'll see that they do have lines like we had in 8.0, but they're subtle. So we worked a lot on that. You'll see the borders. There's shadows around the edges, rounded edges, corners as well. So a lot of little visual details that we've spent a bit of time looking at, and we think these are going to make a difference. When you show to your customers, they're going to perceive the application differently than they would a 9.0 and an 8.0 application. Other things that you'll notice here is that the buttons are understated as well. They have mouse over effects in the rows, and they're also vertical to reduce the amount of space consumed. And then the other thing, too, is that you'll see that the images are on the left side. If you noticed with the previous versions of the Designer, the image was just a column, in the middle. So we are actually, in some ways, modeling things a little bit after the mobile pages. The mobile pages, they have their images on the left, and then just a few choice text fields are shown. So that was really influential, I think, on some aspects. Of course, we have more room to show information here. So let's see, what else we have here? We have a new pagination control. This is something that is much more elegant in 9.1. You'll see that you have your field to select which page you want, but you can then just simply go next and previous. There's a drop-down list for page size. Let me turn it down to 5, and then you'll see move through the pages like that. Now, there's also a first and last button hidden in here, so you can easily include those if you want by changing the visibility property of those. But what we want to do with the out-of-the-box pages was to really make things as elegant as possible. So really a big improvement in 9.1. One last thing on this page I want to show is that there's another pop-up, and that's for the settings in the header file, actually, and that's for changing language. That's why I wanted to do the Dutch. You can see here, if I wanted to change the languages, I would do that there. So that's a simple show record or table page. One thing also I want to show here is the gallery page. And there's really not too much to say on this. It just works. You just create an application, and particularly if you have photos in it, you create the gallery page. And this is one of the things where Iron Speed Designer, it makes things really easy for you. The gallery feature is something customers have wanted for a while, we wanted to do, and it was something that was not a trivial change to the product. Because what's happening under the scenes here is that we've got a nested repeater control. So you see we've got 3 records, in this case, per row. Well, normally you have just 1 record per row in the repeater. So that was really the challenge for this feature. But that was something we did, first thing we developed for 9.1. So very cool feature. Great if you have images. Even if you have just text, you can create a gallery page. Like it would be great for doing mailing labels, for example. And again, gallery can be used in both classic and modern applications. So that's most of the visual elements here. I also want to show you, though, the tab containers that Alan referred to before. So, but before we do that, let's move up a little bit here to a higher complexity of the sales rep table. I want to look at this as it has more fields, but it has photos as well. So here we are, a little more interesting. You see more fields, but you'll notice that we're not scrolling horizontally here. And that's the other thing here that's very key, is that the field labels now in the 9.1 mobile application or web applications are in the repeaters themselves. If you look at how we did things in any of the previous versions of Designer, as 8.0, notice that these field labels are on the column headings, which is nice if you want to scroll down that way. But again, if you have a lot of fields in your table, it's not so great. And so here you can see with, say, 10, 15 fields, no problem. Of course, your row gets taller, but you can remove data if you want. Now you'll notice that this is the enhanced table page, and that means that it has any parent records directly below. So we can expand this and see that. Now, how did we do that in the past? Well, let's go to a previous version of Designer. We'll go to the sales rep table, and we'll see a very different look. So here we see the regular columns, no big deal. Well, here's that guy that we saw. The way we did the parent records in the past is we stuck them in columns of their own. And you can see how that could get unwieldy in terms of scrolling horizontally, but also we did not have field labels for the data, and the column headings weren't as friendly. So it's really a very big improvement in 9.1 Modern. We're creating tab controls for the parents. If there were multiple parents, we'd have multiple tabs for them. We've got them, the tabs clearly labeled, and the field labels being included is really a big improvement. So I think the parent records actually are I think, one of the biggest benefits you get in 9.1 Modern. Now, the child tables, which are similar, are improved as well, as Alan mentioned. And I'll give you a quick peek here, and then we'll probably move on to talking about the buttons, and that'll be it for the modern stuff. So here we've got three child tables, you'll see, and so we don't have any duplicates. So we've eliminated that. So there have been some improvements in there as well. So the tab controls are much nicer, or they're existing now in the parent record. So that, I think, is really a run through all the UI changes that you'll notice right away, at least. One last thing I want to point out is the buttons themselves have changed. If you look at these record pages here, okay, we got save, save anew, and cancel. These buttons here are what we call theme buttons. They're not just simple images. They've got text. And before 9.1, we would create those by using a HTML table with a bunch of images around the borders. And that was about 8 images. So one of the things we've worked on with 9.1 Modern is to improve performance, and not just in the database, but also in terms of the pages, how they load to a web browser. And so we've eliminated those extra images. By using CSS 3.0, we were able to get the same effects and not require those extra images. So you may see some improvements there in the downloading of your pages. The modern styles themselves also have fewer images. They've been designed from the ground up to require fewer images and fewer unique images per page style. So a lot of those are shared between the different modern styles. So that is pretty much all the modern UI changes I've run through. I can go into more detail when I have specific questions later on, but I'm going to move on. I did want to just mention briefly in terms of editing modern applications that modern is a very natural extension to the product, so you pretty much can edit the applications, the pages, and the contents, all that as you did before. So just a few things to be aware of. One is that the gallery pages, you'll notice that we had 3 records in our example, but there's just one field value, and that gets repeated. You can customize through the properties the number of images, records shown per row, so that can be customized at design time. But note behind the scenes that there is a nested repeater here. So if you do code customization, the customization will be slightly different for a repeater in a gallery page. Be aware of that. And then the other thing, too, is that the modern layout is different. So the page sections are different. And if you're not familiar with the page sections in Iron Speed Design, we definitely want to be familiar with it. By default, we take you to the fields page section, but there's a lot more besides that. There are filters that you may want to edit, so you need to be comfortable with this. So here we are in the filters pop-up area. If you want to make layout changes, you could do that here. So my point is that the hierarchy has changed somewhat. We've added new sections. You can see the pop-up buttons area and the panel for the new search control and the filters pop-up. So that's one thing that you may notice different in 9.1, but that's it. So that's how you create a modern application, and pretty much highlights of all the changes we've made in there. So let's see where we are on the agenda. Okay, I'm going to move on and talk briefly about the modern-related options and the field exclusion feature. I'm not going to demonstrate the field exclusion feature, but it's pretty straightforward. You just need to know where to go for it. So let's look at the application generation options that I referred to earlier. You can get to these through the Tools menu or through the Application Wizard dialog options button. And there's a lot of options here. We could have really a whole webinar just on this dialog. So, of course, I won't be able to cover it all. I will point out a few highlights in that the general application options, these affect your building of your application. And there are some new properties for constraining the width of the images that are particularly helpful for the gallery and the show table pages. So that is something that is new in 9.1. What is probably most noticeable here is for new pages when we create them, there's a new section called Common Page Options that did not exist before 9.1. And these affect all your page types, or at least your modern pages. So I just want to run through these real briefly. First one here, if you use previous versions of Iron Speed, you may want this one. You may love everything about modern, but you like your field labels to remain in your column headings in traditional locations. So if you're somewhat traditional, but you like the new look, well, we've got an option for you. You can say, hey, stick my field labels in the above column position. So that's just for the modern. You can make it somewhat classic. Classic is classic, though, so you don't have options there to make classic look like modern. Another thing is that you may have noticed that the sort links in the filters area, there could be multiple sort links, so you can control the maximum number created by default. And another thing, this is another nice feature that we put into 9.1 that you may not notice right away, is that we automatically truncate the menus and the field names and table names, the titles, page titles and all that automatically. We have an automatic algorithm that goes and if it's beyond a certain length, it puts a tilde in there. You don't see it with the sample applications because the names are relatively short. Anyway, you can customize the threshold there. The default is 35. And lastly in here is the fields to exclude feature. This allows you to say, hey, these fields are just for audit trail or something else, and I certainly do not want my end user to edit the created by or edited by field. So if you wanted to, you could simply add a field name created by, comma, created on, and OK, and create new pages. And the new pages, if there are any fields that have those names, those will not be created. So that's at the application level. There's also an equivalent setting in the databases area. Very easy to get to in 9.1. The database properties, if you go to a particular field, you can come in here and you can say exclude from page and say no. So a very powerful feature that some of our advanced customers have requested over time. So those are really the customization options. Again, there are a few different options there in 9.1 to support modern. One thing I should point out is there's one set of options for your whole application. It's not like there's a separate set for classic and a separate set for modern. Some of them might only apply to modern, but be aware that if you make a change, it would affect both new applications created with modern as well as classic. Okay, so I think we're heading toward very soon the performance improvements head-to-head. I'm moving pretty quickly, but yeah, that's exciting. Watching the one run against the other. But we just have a few more things to cover here. A few UI changes we have in the product that I think is important that you're aware of. The first here is the panel wizard. This is something we realized as we were getting 9.0 out the door with the mobile that we had something that we really would like to improve with the usability. And so it's something we improved in 9.1. And it relates to mobile in terms of how it works in the product. The panel wizard, if you go to add a new panel, drag and drop a table, we have now a tree here in the left side. In 9.0, you have a list box. And what happened to list box is I think we had the panel names in alphabetical order, and what happened is that it was too easy to add a mobile page or panel to a web page and vice versa. And pretty much you're going to stick mobile on mobile, web on web. So now the new tree control here, it's really nice. We default to the page type that you have, and we're in a tree section there. So you're less likely to select the wrong type of panel with that. And so that was a UI improvement that came up here internally. But we much prefer the UI improvements that come from customers. So please, if you have ideas on how to improve the product, not just bug reports, but things like this, usability, please let either tech support or your sales folks know about that. So that is the panel wizard. And then the other thing I mentioned, I think it's important to be aware of this, particularly if you're a previous customer, an existing customer, is that the default setting for new applications is now inline SQL. Inline SQL versus stored procedures. Stored procedures execute on the database server. Inline SQL run on the web server. So sometimes stored procedures are faster, but basically what we found is that we had product evaluators who were just trying out the product, and they're like, hey man, you're creating these stored procedures on my database. I don't know, if I'm buying the product or what. And so we said, you know what, it's really better just to keep things simpler, at least in the beginning, and just create inline SQL. And then if you're at a point where you want to tweak the performance, you can turn stored procedures on later. So that is one difference. Out of the box, we're doing inline SQL. But you're certainly free to change it to stored procedures at any time. But just be aware of that. Okay, I think we are now ready for the head-to-head comparison here. App creation and show table execution. So I'm going to create a whole new application here with SQL Server. Let me make sure I'm on 9.1. The thing is that we've changed the pages and everything a lot, but the user interface, the general look since 8.0 through 9.1 with the tree and the toolbar is, I think, pretty much the same. So the easy way to tell which is if I actually go into the live preview. So I'm going to go in here and bear with me for a moment. I'm going to create, actually I'm going to make it a MANA application so it'll look as close as possible, the 9.1 application, to well, I don't have MANA installed here, so okay, well, we'll just do a Chardonnay. You'll notice that Chardonnay actually uses the same colors as MANA, so this is actually the first prototype modern page style that we created that extended the work on MANA. So let's create Chardonnay. It doesn't really make much of a difference, really, the style we're using, but I'm going to try and make this comparison be as as close and as fair as possible. So I'm going to point to a database server where I've got a lot of records in the database table. And the thing about this database is that there's also a bunch of tables in it as well. So we're going to be testing two things at once: application creation and running of the application. And let's see, here is the 9.0 application. And to keep this straight, I'm going to put that on the bottom. So, and I think it's actually 9.01. There's some bug fixes in 9.01, but it doesn't really make much of a difference. And we're going to select Mana, SQL Server. Okay, and I want to create the same pages between the two versions, so I'm going to have to be careful with that. Okay, here's one table I want, account company, and I'm going to turn off the workflow and the mobile just to keep things simple here. So remember, those were on by default in 9.0. So I've got 6 pages per table, and I'm going to add this other table and this one here and this one here. These are the guys with lots of records in them. And I'm going to take things as far as I can before pressing that Finish button and make sure I'm doing website C# 3.5. You know, not that I think any of those things will make a difference in terms of building the application, but I want to just keep them things as consistent as possible. Because, you know, the improvements we made are related to database. So we're going to be using the same database and keep everything else the same as well. And so let's just do the same thing here. No workflow, no mobile. Let's just turn off gallery so we get 6 pages each, and contact. Okay. And if I did this right, we've got 24 pages to be created here and 24 pages to be created here. And I'm going to give the 9.0 application a slight head start since you know, it's expected to be slower, and then we'll see how things go. So I'm so excited I can barely move the mouse and click the Finish button, but here it goes. There's 9.0. It's already starting, and here's 9.1 here at the top and full screen. And let me bring them here, one on top of the other. So remember, 9.0 is on the bottom. Now, let's look at what's happening here. 9.0 is preparing to create table definitions. It's talking about what it's going to do. Here's 9.1. It's looking at foreign key relationships on the top there. So it seems like it's getting a faster start out of the gate. But we don't have any code generated yet. So, you know, we don't know. And just to give you kind of a clue how the race will work out, it's not like this is a race where you can suddenly just sprint at the end and take the lead. It doesn't work that way. The database stuff is what's done up front. So if you take the lead at the beginning of the race, you're probably going to do pretty well overall. So let's see how we're doing. Still a little early to tell. You'll see that they're both looking at foreign key relationships. There we go. 9.1, it just finished the first stage, table definitions. It's creating now files. So you can see it's created the project files, and it's going to move on to something else soon. There it goes. It's creating C# code at this point. Here's 9.0. It's still looking at foreign key relationships. And again, that's the area that we've improved in 9.1. And this means that it's going to be faster creating applications with a reasonable number of tables. I mean, here we have, I think, less than 100 tables. But it's also going to make it feasible to create applications for the first time in environments with maybe several thousand tables in a single database. And there are many Oracle environments like that. Look at that. 9.1 is already done, and it's looking to steal the show here and open up a browser and everything. While 9.0 is, well, it's looking at foreign key relationships. But 9.0 actually, it'll wrap up pretty quickly here. So it's not like we're going to, have to extend the webinar there for 9.0. But while it's doing this thing, let's just look at the 9.1 application. And these applications will be, essentially identical. The UI is different, but the generation speed is going to be about the same. There's the 9.1 application there with a new look with the tabs using the Chardonnay page style. And I'm going to look here. Okay, well, 9.1 is moving along. It's past the database phase, so now we can expect it'll be a pretty constant amount of time. It'll be equivalent to 9.1 speed at this point. But again, that initial phase of scanning foreign keys, that was something that could just take a really, really long time if there were many, many tables. So this is something that you're going to notice speed improvements if you have a reasonable number of tables out there in the field. So I've got to wrap up here, and fortunately, okay, 9.0 just finished. So I had just one last thing to demonstrate with that, and we'll move to questions. I want to show you the page processing speed. Now, you may not notice this here in that we're looking at this account company table, and 9.1 just ran, and 9.0 is compiling here. We'll run in probably similar speed. It looks like we ran into something there. Let me see. Sometimes I run into a hiccup here when I first run a page. So this table is actually not going to be a problem. There we go. The same page table on both applications. What I want to show you is this other table that I've got that has many, many more records. I think this is easily hundreds of thousands. I think it's actually millions of records. Show contacts table. Let's go look at that page. And we'll give 9.0 a head start. And let's get 9.1 running here as well and see how that goes. So here we're looking at page running performance. And they're both compiling the code, so we're not there yet. Okay, here we go. The 9.1 application has shown that table as well. We're all fine. What's going on here with 9.0? Well, it's still compiling, so let's give that a moment. And actually, while that's going, let me just, to make best use of the time, just take another quick peek here at the presentation and see if there's anything else we wanted to talk about. I think just one thing I'd mention here is just ignore global where clause, just to tell you a little more about that. So that's a simple code customization you can do in 9.1. And basically, it relates to the Batchmeister wizard. Great feature we introduced, I think, in 9.0, where you can globally make changes to an application, but sometimes customers don't want it to apply to a narrower area of the product. So here's something where the where clauses in the Batchmeister wizard, you can exclude them in some places with a single line of code customization. So that was really the agenda. Let's see how everybody is doing here. Oh, well, 9.0, it finished all right. It timed out. That it was trying to count all the records in the database, and there were millions, I think many millions of records. And so that's been a problem that we've seen in the real world, that just even though we're paging showing 10 records at a time, we need to, it still takes a while to count the records for the pagination. So we've changed things in 9.1, so we retrieve records differently. We use row num instead of what we call a triple somersault, which I could talk more about it if there's a question on the topic. And we've also changed the pagination control. So here's a case where the 9.0 was not able to actually run the page, at least the first time out. We might have better success the second time when the database is warmed up. But 9.1 had no problem at all running that page, that table. So it doesn't degrade like it would in the past. And then I'm going to move through pages, and that'll should come through relatively quickly. In fact, I was trying this with a smaller database last night, and 9.0 actually finished, and I wasn't sure what had happened in that case, but it turned out the pagination was still way faster, even that. And I think that was like with 9.1. I think that was like 330,000 records. So you're going to see performance improvements, even with maybe a few 100,000 records in your database table. So that's it. That's what I've got to show you for the demo. I think I've covered all the most significant things there in 9.1, but the modern page styles really are the emphasis. So, okay, so I'm going to move right on to questions here. I see I got a big stack. Okay, wait, no, we're going to switch to Alan.
Great, thanks. In keeping with our traditional practice, I'm going to answer all the easy questions and leave the hard ones for Jim. That'll also give him a minute to rest his voice and read the questions that we've been collecting here. Pete K asks, says, I love the modern layouts. Very well done. Thanks. Appreciate that comment. Nat asks, Will the old templates still be available as when I tried 9.1, they seem to have disappeared? Yes, all the classic templates are still there. You'll need to, of course, download them as part of that installation package when you install 9.1 so that they're available to you. But yes, they're all still available. David R. asks, can you upgrade a current 9.0 theme to one of the new V9.1 themes? You're probably asking, can you change from a classic page layout to a modern page layout? And the answer is, unfortunately, no. There are a few reasons for doing that. One is that we do not ever change your page layout. Once you create a page, that layout is yours. So that would actually give you very inconsistent page layouts. You know, some would be the old and some would be the new, and that's just part of the long-term application migration strategy that we've had in place for quite a while, and that seems to be the strategy that most of our users actually prefer. Nat M asks, where can you change the opacity of the labels as they appear a bit too light for viewing? That's all controlled by your application style sheet that we generate with your application. So if you look in your app_themes folder using the Application Explorer and drill down a bit, you'll find there are two style sheet files in your selected theme. One's called Base Styles and the other is called Styles. Pretty much everything is located in Base Styles.css. Now, if you want to override that, you can do that one of two ways. You can make the change either directly in Base Styles and call it a day, or you can copy the particular style you would like to change into styles.css and then make that change there. That's actually what we recommend because styles.css always overrides base styles.css. That way, you can upgrade from version to version of Iron Speed Designer. As we add new classes, that base styles will get upgraded, but we never overwrite what is in styles.css. So that's a bit of a safer approach. Pete K. asks, do I understand right that older apps cannot be migrated using the modern page layouts? Well, you can migrate an app from any version into Iron Speed Designer version 9.1, but it won't change the page style on you from a classic layout to a modern layout. That is by design, since we never change any layout once a page has already been created for you, because we don't know what customizations you made and so forth. So we don't want to undo anything that you might have spent time doing. Nats has a feature request. He says, save the build options or reload a saved set of build options from a file so that the same pages, tables, etc. can be reselected and more important, remember how you created the last build. Thanks very much. We do save the application generation options, and those go from application to application, page to page, and so forth. But you're right, we don't save the set of selected pages and so forth. So that's a good comment. Thank you. John P. says, I use the Batchmeister to filter a customer-facing app based on a field named Enterprise ID. As the Super Systems Administrator, I need to see all data. So how do I establish an OR condition based on my login ID to allow the Batchmeister to do this? So it sounds like what you're attempting to do there is kind of what we call a multi-tenant application where you've got different companies, different organizations all in the same database. And so normally people only see their own stuff, but then other folks like you, the Super Systems Administrator, just see your own. Well, what I would recommend doing in that case is creating a separate set of pages that allow you to see everything. Alternatively, you could create a view. Or you could just not do an override on a particular page to change that so that you don't apply that if a particular role like Super Systems Administrator is in place. So there are three different ways to do that. The one I think I would probably favor is just create a different set of pages or even an app so that you can see all without the Meister application being applied. Stephen W. says, I have found that when going through the deployment wizard for a large application, it bombs out because of memory issues. Is this addressed better in V9.1? You know, I don't know the answer to that. You might just try it with V9.1. The deployment wizard did get a pretty extensive testing in this release, so it wouldn't surprise me to see that if there were any problems there that they had been addressed, but I think there's really only one way to find out. You didn't specify how much memory you have and so forth, and so it could just simply be a memory issue. And keep in mind also that we rely a lot on some of the .NET facilities and Visual Studio facilities in some cases to actually generate deployment applications. So without knowing, you know, a little more specifics of what type of installer you're creating and so forth, it's a little hard to say. So my advice, simple though it may be, is just to try it at 9.1 and see what happens. If you do hit a persistent out-of-memory error, please do let us know so that we can investigate that. Just contact us through our normal support mechanism. Dadson says, this is interesting, gentlemen. Thank you. I love it, but can 9.1 be used to generate a complete data-driven website without having to write additional HTML code? That's exactly what Iron Speed Designer does. So the short answer is yes. Now, that said, there's usually some amount of page layout customization you'll want to do, but as you probably saw with Jim's demo, there's no knowledge of HTML required. You just kind of drag and drop things around in the layout editor spreadsheet grid, so it's actually pretty simple to do. So it's only when you're trying to do something very specialized and customized would you even need to know anything about HTML in there. So yes, that's exactly what Iron Speed Designer is designed to do, is to save you from having to do HTML and C# and Visual Basic coding. John P. asks, I use the Everest theme horizontal menu structure because it allows for more screen with real estate. In the upgrade to V9.1, is the upgrade to V9.1 going to automatically change this to a vertical menu theme when migrating an existing app to V9.1? No, absolutely not. We, as I've mentioned before, do not change any aspect of your app when migrating from one version to the other. And that's on purpose because we found the vast majority of our users, once they get an app like they like it, they don't want an upgrade to affect the layouts or functionality of that app. Maxwell E. asks, is it possible to incorporate third-party components? Yes, in fact, that's a very central feature in Iron Speed Designer. And you do it the exact same way that you would in Visual Studio. It's very simple. Through the layout grid, you simply go in and go into the cell editor and type the control that you want. You know, it should be like an angle bracket, ASP colon something, or angle bracket, Telerik colon, or rad colon, whatever it is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how you hook in third-party component. It's pretty much the same way you would in Visual Studio. Christopher W. asks, will I see performance improvement if I migrate a V8.0 app to V9.1? My app currently uses Diablo. Yes, the application performance improvements are really separate from the page style that you select. That has to do with the generated code and designer itself. So yes, you should, especially in large data sets, see a performance speed up in your applications. Okay, with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Jim now, who will answer the hard questions.
Okay. Okay. So this first question from Melissa C., question on filters. So you cannot choose more than one filter at a time. I want to clarify that you can choose more than one filter at a time. In fact, that's why in 9.1 we decided not to turn on the auto postback, and we always create a go button for the filters. And that's so that you can pick two filter values and you can press go. Now, I did not demo that because I did not know what filter values to choose that would get me any data at all. But I could certainly here do that, and I'm going to have to get any records because I didn't know the values. But you certainly can do that. In fact, that's our expectation, that many people will filter more than one value. So we did not want to dismiss the filters dialog when you filter. So let me just reset the filters here. Now, if you want, you can turn auto postback on an individual filter if you want, so that as soon as somebody changes the value, you immediately see the refreshed data. But we've seen that that doesn't really work that well in the real world. There's a lot of data, particularly if someone is scrolling through the list of filter values, they're going to be waiting constantly for long periods of time. But some applications you may want to do that. So yes, you absolutely can filter on more than one value. You can also simultaneously search and apply sorts. All those features can be combined, any combination you want. That's the way it always was, and it still is. Next question from Valerie S. How do you hide the actions drop-down? Good question. Like I said, you can customize the layout. You don't have to go with what we've got here. You can make changes. So one thing you can do, and this may be a little drastic for you, but you can just delete the whole section. You could just come in here and delete your buttons button along with the panel, the pop-up panel that goes with it. Same thing with the filters. You can just delete it with the delete key in design mode, one fell swoop. Now, if you're not ready for something as drastic, you can then make changes to it. For example, here I have the pop-up for the filters. Well, the question was about the buttons. We can drill down into here, and what you'll see with all these pop-ups is that there is a HTML div tag here that actually wraps the pop-up area. So the pop-up area, you can change the visibility on that, or if you simply wanted to hide the button, you can find the panel and the button and hide those as well in the editor. So all the stuff is inside the editor. We go into filters. Here's our filter area. But if we go into, let's see here, the panel header in the title region, we can get access to all those things. So you certainly can change the layout inside the pop-ups and the buttons as well. Okay, moving on here, I got kind of a long question from Melissa C. as well. I have an app I'm working on. The user wants 3 ways of inputting the data. Import, which I have, single entry, which I have, but the one I'm having difficulty with is an Excel spreadsheet. What is the best way to handle the scrolling for 100 columns or more? It would be cool if you could have them grouped into a tab-type layout so you could see a group of the rows at the same time. Any ideas? So this sounds like what she's run into is a problem directly analogous to the problem we had with the web pages in previous versions, where if you had many columns, you had to scroll. And unfortunately, that's how Excel is. It's meant to be scrolled, horizontally and vertically. So, that's kind of expected to the Excel user. It's a little bit different in Excel, and typically that, your cell values tend to be simple. In Iron Speed Designer, you see that, on a row we can be putting in tab control, so it is a bit more complex, and that's why the two-dimensional scrolling is more problematic. For a spreadsheet, I think your users are going to tend to do that. Now, in terms of the import, the Iron Speed import of Excel and CSV, that is an area we would like to improve significantly. So this sounds like something that we would consider there. I know there's a lot of things we could improve with both the import and the export. And we have made some improvements in terms of the formatting and some issues that have been resolved in that area in 9.1 and 9.0. But we haven't made any what I would call major enhancements. That's something we would be considering for the future. So, thanks for that. Relating that to the same thing. I'm not sure what you could do in terms of automatically at this point, though, with Iron Speed, supporting different layouts. And we're very much, meant to use a cell row format. So even with the code customization, I think you kind of have to work with Excel the way it is. Okay, next question from Stephen W. Are there any additional PDF features in 9.1, for example, converting a show record page into a PDF page? No, I believe I've covered all, at least the major features in 9.1. I mentioned that the PDF button is now created by default. We turn the application generation options on for that since we have plenty of room for it in the Actions pop-up. But the PDF export, I believe that is the same in 9.1. I think there was some change in either the Excel import or export that addressed, an issue, but that was the extent of that in 9.1. Next question from Donald A. What does it take to convert an existing 9.0 app to use the Actions and Filters buttons? Those are features that are in the modern page styles. We don't have a way of doing that, or I think, a list of steps. It's not something that, is meant for you to do. But hypothetically, what would you do to go about it? You probably would move CSS styles, copy them from Modern into Classic, and then look at the HTML in the cell editor, the Modern application, and potentially copy that. But if you do copy parts of pages from Modern to Classic or vice versa, you run into having some problems there, because they are a different design. Even though we do support copy and paste between applications in Iron Speed Designer, which many people may not be aware of. But that would probably be the easiest ways to try and do copy and pasting. But it's not something that is trivial. Well, I think once you figure it out and get the handle on it, it's not too bad. But it's not something we're expecting our customers to do. Next question from GFK. Can the pagination controls show the total number of pages? Yes, it certainly can. So it's not like we don't have total page number support there in the product. It's just that we're not showing it there in the new pagination control. And part of that was to make things simple, but also part of it also is performance. What we found was that just to show you the total number of pages, we needed to know the total number of records. And to do that, we would have to do a SQL count star and count all the records. And so if you had a large database with millions of records, we'd have to count those. So initial page loading could be very slow as a result of that. So that's why we made the change there. But yes, you can definitely put the same controls in there. And we do have, just to point out very quickly, in the shared areas where the pagination controls are, you'll see that there's a new pagination modern, and there's also the traditional pagination ACX. And customers have asked us, how do I switch pagination controls? I don't like this one or that one. Well, you can just rename them. Just rename one of them to a temporary and get the names back to be the opposite. And you can actually swap out a pagination control globally across your whole application. But yes, you can certainly customize your pagination controls. Another question on that area from Anna E. Pagination control. Can it default to be right justified and show total number of pages? It pretty much is the format that it is. I mean, you could use, like I said, one of the other pagination controls. Pagination medium is the mono pagination control that we'd introduced. So you could use that. That would probably be the simplest thing there, especially if you want to right justify. Because you'll notice that what we did in 9.1 is, and if any of you had seen the beta, if you're on our product council, you had gotten a kind of a pre-release version of the product. The pagination is actually something we tweaked there just post-beta. We had another idea here to split things up and put the page size on the right and the page number in the middle, which I think is a really nice improvement. So because of that, the pagination control is kind of set up to be that way. It's not that very hard to change that, actually. You would just be changing the alignment for the cells there. So, I mean, I can't go into the details here, but to just kind of give you an idea on how this thing is constructed, we've got two sub-panels in the pagination control with 100% on that one and 50% on the page size one. And then we have a cell here, 50%, and 50% here on the left. So basically, you'd be changing those percentages for these cells. If you want to remove the gap, and if you wanted to left align things, and probably put 100% here on the right, something like that. So that's certainly doable. You just have to experiment. Okay. And related question, Anna E. Sorry, on pagination. Meant to say default left justified. So yes, you could do that, but again, this is for a single application. If you wanted it to apply to newly created applications, you really would have to go into the templates for Iron Speed Designer, which is possible, but it's not something we generally would recommend. And of course, once you upgrade to a new version of Iron Speed, it would not have any changes you made. It would be a fresh installation. Next question from Anna E. Can you export images to PDF, etc.? Good question. As far as I know, all the import-export features are working with text and numeric values. They don't support images and other complex types like that. I suppose to do a code customization for something like that would be doable. If you're comfortable in that area, but no, that is another thing that we'd like to improve in the import-export features. And the thing with those features is that they tend to be very secondary features in terms of customers using them. They're handy for doing maybe initial population of data, but they usually not used day in day out by the end users. And if they are, and you have features that you want in them, that might be something to contact your sales representatives. So that they can lobby on your behalf for that. That would be an area we could improve in the product. Next question from Tommy. And can I use the gallery page style as a default page off a single parent record page? I'm not sure about this. I know you can configure like the images in the gallery. Do they go to like a show record or an edit record page? But the links that point to the multiple record pages, I'm not sure if that is customizable. So there may be an app gen option for that, but I can't say for sure. So I'm going to look into this one. Hopefully we've got contact information. Yes, we do. Okay, so we'll be contacting every Tommy N out there. So I will have to look into that with our gallery expert and get an answer to you on that. Next question from Tommy N. How about pop-ups off the image in the gallery style page with more detail in the pop-up? Now, the pop-ups for the images are essentially the same as they were in 9.0, so there's no new functionality there. The difference is in that the images on the pages themselves, they actually are wider. So you will notice that if you create a new application against the same database, the images are wider, but you can customize that in the application generation options. But the pop-up itself is the same, so it does not give any detailed fields. It's really meant just to be for the image. So, and customizing that, I think that might be, that may not be something that can be done because that image pop-up is kind of what it is. That's another one, though, that I'm going to try and get a more definitive answer, and that one may take a little more time on to find out more about the pop-up. Good questions. So yes, Alan promised that these would be the harder questions, so he was right. Next question from Anna E. I would like to be able to assign a control type to a column. I've created by, created data sets, or order columns. I want them to show, but always as a label, not a text. Any plans for something like that? That's an interesting question. The control types, we try and do our best guess in terms of the default control type. So if it's a editable field and it's say a foreign key, we'll create a drop-down list for you and use display foreign key as maybe a feature and display nice values. If it's not editable, we'll use a label there instead of a text box, so or a drop-down list. So this is something where I think right at this point you would need to really make it be a read-only field in the database or in the database's tab, and that would automatically trigger it being a label, so to be text only. So you could do that in the databases tab after adding the tables. There's a property for I think it's read-only, and then create the pages afterwards. That would be the key. You could also do it in the database level, but then you'd have to find a way to edit the field, and that would be pretty complicated. So I think this could be done, but you would have to, again, make the changes in the database tab first before creating the pages. But so there is not a special features for this at this point in time, where you can specify control type based upon name. But the feature we have in 9.1 is you can just exclude the fields, so that we do not create them in the user interface, and the Batchmeister wizard ignores them as well. So that's a good question. And the fact this whole audit table concept, this is another area where we could develop the product significantly further. We've improved it, added some features, I think, over the past few releases. It used to be a code customization wizard function, and now we've got proper support for it. But we keep getting ideas about how to improve the audit functionality. So this is another good idea we can put in there for the future. Next question from Ricardo C. Is there a way to make the modern layouts be available to SharePoint 2010? You know, that's a great question. In fact, this is one of the questions that actually, kept me up at night a while back. What we found with 9.1 was that the SharePoint page layouts were very different from the ones created for non-SharePoint applications. They had a completely separate set of layouts, and we basically would be re-implementing the whole modern layout, to work with it, to support it. And so, we did not, provide support for modern layouts for SharePoint applications, and that's something that, we're looking to see customer feedback on, on how they feel about that. So, that is something that if you're interested in, please contact your sales representative and, tell them about it. So, excellent question. Next question from Mohammed H. Can we use a new modern design for SharePoint sites? No, you can't. SharePoint is a classic style. And again, once you create an application, it's either classic or modern. You cannot change from one family to the other. You can change the page style within the family. So you can go from Cabernet to Chardonnay. Just keep changing until you find your favorite wine. But the application is inherently modern or it's classic, and that's even if you create it with 9.1. So if it's your final application, choose your family. I mean, you're probably going to want to use modern and make adjustments there. There's just so many improvements in modern. Next question from Dave S. In the fields to exclude property, can we use wildcard characters? It would be great to exclude all PK fields by specifying *_PK. That's Dave S. And that's something that I want to get back to you on. That, I suspect, maybe we have. I mean, that's something would have been very doable when the feature was designed, so it could very well be the case. So I'm going to look into this and get back with an answer. But I don't know either way. But that certainly is something feasible. We could even do in the future, even if we don't have it now. Next question from Anna E. Can we import our application options from 9.0 to 9.1? Great question. So the way the application options work is that there's a copy of them for every application you create. So if you migrate an application, we migrate the options that are there for you. So it should continue working as before. So we have changed the default options for new applications. Like, different buttons are created in your applications in 9.1, even with Classic. So, but for existing applications, they should work as they did before. So, but in terms of new applications, if you wanted them to look like previous Classic applications, you would need to change those options. But migrate applications should work exactly as before. Next question from Maxwell E. Do the Iron Speed application generation embrace ASP.NET MVC? This is a really good question, and sometimes I hear this from the sales team. And we do have what we would call an MVC architecture in terms of how the code is generated. It is not using the ASP.NET MVC architecture, and we wrestle with this. This is something where there wouldn't be, we think, a huge benefit for many of our customers. Many of our customers are looking at what the product can do for them, and they're not looking so much at the underlying coding conventions and all of that. And a lot of it comes down to the installed base. Is that Iron Speed is a product with thousands and thousands of customers, and many times that in terms of applications. And if we went in a major different way architecturally in terms of ASP.NET MVC, then we're looking at one of two things. We're either looking at not supporting the old coding style, at least with new applications, or providing side-by-side support for two very different architectures. And that's something where we don't see a lot of benefit for the existing customers, and the new customers is mostly the ones that are hand coding. Looking at that, so it's something we've thought about and considering for the future. But there are a lot of other things that we're looking at, like HTML5 and features that people have mentioned. So things have not changed in that area, and that would be a major change in the product. So Again, with any of these features especially, if it's a feature, a significant feature, contact your salesperson, because then they can really lobby on your behalf. If it's a bug, a lot of times, just going straight to support for that is the best way of going. Next question, Maxwell E. Does a generated application have offline capability? I assume what this means is that if I'm not on the internet or the network, can I use the application? The applications we create are web applications, so that means generally, they require you to have access to a web server, between your requests. Now, there are some things that can occur without being on the network, minor operations like the pop-down filters and actions. That's not a network operation. You don't need access to the web server for that. And the parent records that we saw, things like that, we don't go to the server for. But if you want to navigate from page to page, yes, you're darn right. You've got to be online for that. I mean, it's a web application. So next question, Antonio C. I tried to download and install the rest of the module layout, but still not able to see them. Now, I'm not sure what that means, if there was a problem, with the initial installation of 9.1, if you can't see the modern applications. I know there have been some questions that have come in where people have opened their existing applications, 9.0 applications and 9.1, and they got migrated, and they could not get to the modern page styles. And that is by design. Again, you can't change the family of an application. So here I have a modern application. I can change it to other modern styles. I can't go to classic. Likewise, if I had a classic application, I would see that modern styles is disabled. So I don't know if that's the issue there or if there's some other thing. Oh, another thing to be aware of is that when you install Iron Speed Designer 9.1, out of the box, you get all the modern styles ready to go. The classic styles require a separate download. I believe the SharePoint ones are special. I think those are always included. But the other ones, like Mana, and you saw me run into that with 9.0 earlier. I tried creating a Mana application or something with one of the versions. Actually, it's 9.1, and I did not have the page styles installed. So the classic styles need to be installed with a separate download. So I hope I answered your question. If not, follow up and even step the webinar, to support, resolve your problem. 9.0 or 9.1 is a very new release. Came out just over a week ago. So, please let us know if there's anything there that you want us to look at. Next question, Antonio C. How to avoid the scrolling bar left-right? You don't want the application to display in a browser, and user needs to scroll to see the data. Well, so this is the problem we look to address with 9.1, that you do not need to scroll horizontally. So that's why we have the fields, the labels and the repeaters, and truncating menu names and all of that. So, I mean, that should already be done. Now, there is, I don't know if this is a reference to, there is a bug that we've discovered since 9.1 came out where we're seeing scroll bars at the bottom of the screen, but there's really nothing to scroll to see. So that is something that we have a fix for. If you run to that, we can just give you some quick CSS changes, and those will be incorporated in the next maintenance version of 9.1. So I don't know if that's what you're running into, but the data certainly fits on the screen. It's just something where the scroll bar is showing when we wish it would not. So I hope that addresses your question. Next question from Bill F. Question for later. Well, I guess that's now. Knowing which version of ISD is open is a continual problem. Why can't the version number be added to the page title so it will show above as the page is open? Iron Speed Designer V9.1, for example. That's a great idea. As a presenter, I would love it. As you saw, I was struggling with 3 different versions of Designer, trying to remember which is which. So from my perspective, it'd be great if customers want this. Sounds like a great idea, and we'll get it in. So let us know if you don't want it. Otherwise, we're just going to do this. Great idea. Next question, Melissa C. Can I not put the version right after the words Iron Speed on the menu? I have the same problem as he does not know which version I'm in. So it sounds like there were people using mobile versions of Iron Speed Designer. So it's good to get that feedback. So so this sounds like a good improvement. So thanks for seconding the notion. And this is something we'll definitely look at. And those are the things that if they're very small, please bring us to our attention because we can affect that, as opposed to like an MVC type of thing where we're looking at a multi-month development effort in a case like that. And we have to really think of the opportunity cost. Next question, Guyan C. Programming enhancements question. 1. Any plans to add IntelliSense natively into ISD, which would be such a huge help instead of jumping in and out of Visual Studio? Actually, we do have it in there. I didn't think it was in there, but it actually is in there. If you go to the code behind file, and I haven't tried this in every code behind in all different places, but you come in here, and I say this dot, and there you can see my autocomplete IntelliSense functionality. Now, you might not think we don't have it because, well, we don't have it in the code tab. Because here we're showing a snippet of code. I need to get to say a field, anything that I can customize. We don't have code customization IntelliSense functionality here. So that is something we'd like to have, but I think because we're just showing a snippet, it doesn't show. So, you could go to Visual Studio. The way I would look at this, I've done some code customization, and, I use Iron Speed and Visual Studio side by side. What I'll do is I'll use the code tab here just to put a little marker so I know what code I want to modify, and then I'll jump over to Visual Studio, and it'll take me to the file, and I can search on that and make the changes there. Visual Studio is just a better development environment for hand coding. So it has the IntelliSense built in, but it also has all the references, the debugging. If you want to debug the application, you've got to do it in there. So generally, that's what I'll do. Be careful if you have the application open in both Visual Studio and Iron Speed Designer if you're going to make changes like adding files to projects and things like that. But I find that works pretty well. Again, you can do the IntelliSense if you open up the entire code behind, in which case you probably would just be in Visual Studio. So yeah, that is something though we would like to improve the support for in the future. But remember, we're never going to be Visual Studio. We're not going to create a debugger and all of that. That is what Microsoft does. So if you do hand coding with Iron Speed Designer, significant hand coding, definitely invest in Visual Studio. In fact, there's a free express version that you can get that will at least get you by in terms of debugging. The second part of this question, or her question, I can't tell, any plans to add SQL or features support natively and not simply and all conditions in the SQL Query Designer? That is a really good question. It's come up sometimes. The where clause editor in the Query Wizard is just and statements, so that is very much the case. We'd like to have ors in there. Just as soon as you have ands and ors, mixing around together, then that brings up the question of parentheses. How do you, group these together, which takes precedence? So then you get into a bit, complexity there. From an end user perspective and also from a design perspective. So that would be a significant change to the product. I think a good addition. And again, I would say if that's something you want, contact your sales representative, and speak to that, because that's something that we would consider adding to the product. Now, in the meantime, you can certainly do those equivalents, ands and ors and all that with the code customization. The API supports that. So, don't let the the lack of it being in the UI stop you from using that. The base classes does allow that, but great feature, and that I hope we'll have that in the future. Next question from Nat M. Please, can you give an example of inline SQL? So I can give you an example of what the SQL might look like. So I'm going to go into let's see the previously mentioned Query Wizard. So let's go to a top level here and go to data sources. And I'm not going to get into all the data sources. I just want to open up one thing here, just a table control. We can see the SQL here at the bottom, but I'm going to open up the Query Wizard where we can get a better look at it, where we'll kind of see what the SQL would look like. And I will say that this is an approximation. We'll have a select from. This is a pretty simple case, but there would be more complex cases that would kind of give you an idea what SQL would look like. Now, the actual SQL behind the scenes that we really create in Iron Speed Designer is a bit more complex. I mentioned triple somersault before. It's a cross-platform technique for retrieving a set of records at any point in the database. That involves like 3 levels of, I believe, select statements combined together. So, that's what Iron Speed Designer is doing for you. It is, making things look very simple that are actually, hard to do in the real world. So the SQL is similar for inline and stored procedures. The difference with inline is that it's generated and run through the code on the web server. The stored procedures are actually installed on the SQL server. Now, the stored procedures are actually fairly easy to see. If we had turned on stored procedures in the application wizard, we could actually go into the databases tab, and at the bottom there, you would see stored procedures. We don't have any here because we didn't create them. So stored procedures are easy to see. The inline SQL is actually in the code. So, that is, kind of tucked away a little bit more. But, you needn't necessarily look at or be concerned about the details of the SQL itself. It's the more important thing is, where is that executing or not? And that's what we changed in 9.1. We haven't actually changed the SQL itself. Just that the default setting is in line, and you are free to change that. So I believe that's the last question for me, so I'm going to turn it back over here to Alan.
Okay, thanks, Jim. I'm back to some easy questions now, and we'll let Jim rest his voice, and he can read up on the next set of hard questions while I answer the easy ones. David R. asks, when upgrading from V9.0 to V9.1, will V9.1 remove the stored procedures and related code, remove the unused stored procedures? No, pretty much all of the stored procedures that we generate are used, so it actually updates those every time you touch something that would cause part of the data access layer to be regenerated. So while it will be regenerated, I don't know that you're going to see any great savings in stored procedures, except for tables in your application that may not be used, in which case those would no longer be generated. So I think you'll see some savings there, although I don't think we did really any significant change in that aspect. Vivek Kananda asks, after generating web application, if we do any changes or enhancements to the database, do we need to regenerate the web application? Yes, that's actually very simple to do, and Designer has been designed to accommodate that. Here's what you do. You go to the databases pull-down menu, and where it says Synchronize Database Schema, what you do is you select that. That will instruct Iron Speed Designer to go out and re-import your database schema. Then if you accept the changes to the schema for the selected table, it will actually update your application wherever necessary to accommodate changes to the schema. So if you've changed a data type, it'll accommodate that. If you've renamed a field, it'll accommodate that. Those sorts of things. If you've dropped a field, it will remove controls that use that field so that they won't be on the page anymore. Because obviously anything like that would cause a runtime error. So after you've synchronized and accepted, then you simply click build or run. It'll regenerate as appropriate, and you're good to go. So all in all, it's quite a simple process. Stephen says it was ASP_merge that got to 1.7 megabyte whilst compiling the error, then errored with insufficient memory. Only occurs if database has a large number of tables. I have 12 megabytes of RAM. Stephen, if you have 12 megabytes of RAM, you might consider getting a new computer, maybe upgrading from an IBM AT to something a little more contemporary. You may have meant that you had 12 gigabytes of RAM, which should be plenty to operate, but if we really have 12 megabytes, as you'd indicated, that's not going to do it. I think you're referring to the deployment wizard generation of of your application, and again, I think my advice is just to try it with 9.1 and see what happens. If you get an error, then I would contact our tech support team with that specific error, and that we can take a look at it then. Stan C says, isn't inline SQL less secure, i.e. subject to SQL injection than stored procedures? or does Iron Speed include better security for inline SQL? We actually have some fairly extensive online help on SQL injection attacks, and you can see how we handle those. So in the interest of time, I would invite you to read that material in our online help. Just search for SQL injection, and it should find it. But in answer to your question, no, we don't think that inline SQL is any more or less secure than stored procedures. We think the SQL that we generate is actually quite secure regardless of where that SQL is domiciled, inline or in the database. That said, a lot of folks have a preference to either inline or stored procedures. That's why we support both. We actually are somewhat agnostic, and it can become almost a religious issue as to what people think is better. So if you don't like inline SQL, then use stored procedure for whatever reasons you might have, or vice versa. Charlie asks, is this the proper venue to ask about features you did not discuss here? I am enrolled for the Friday seminar as well. FYI, I'm new to your software. Well, Charlie, welcome to Iron Speed Designer. Glad to have you on board. Feel free to ask questions in any venue. Different presenters may have more or less knowledge about features, but do feel free to ask. And generally, we're pretty good about hunting things down and following up if it's a question that we can't answer, or at least we can refer you to the appropriate place to get an answer. Obviously, these types of webinars are really not good forums if you have a technical support question. We can't debug your code or something like that, but we can certainly discuss features in webinars like this. Melissa asks, I've noticed the workflow pages tend to decrease application speed. Is this changed in 9.1? I migrated and didn't see a difference. I think it really all depends on what you're trying to do and what's on those pages more than the type of page. So for example, if you happen to have a table page that has a lot of fields, there's going to be a lot of view states associated with that. If there are a lot of drop-downs on a particular page, that's going to slow the particular page speed, not the overall application, but the page speed, because it has to run queries to pull all of the data for each of the different drop-downs. So we actually have a lot of detail on application performance in our online help. That's in part 1 of the online help. I would recommend you take a look at that. You can get a lot of guidance on what to do to improve application performance. That said, more often than not, we find that application performance really is driven by how well indexed your database is. So if you happen to be searching or filtering or sorting on a field that is not indexed in a table of any size, you're going to pull a full table scan, and that will take some time. So indexing usually solves nearly all application performance problems. But like I say, check in our online help. We've got a lot of detail. Ricardo says, can you make cascading filters? Yes, you certainly can. The filters that Iron Speed Designer generates or that you drag on from the toolbox are all designed to cooperate together. So if you select one filter value and then filter on a second field, it'll actually apply both. So they're not disjoint. They work together. So if you say where first name is Allen and last name is Fisher, it will actually create the query dynamically at runtime that says where first name equal Allen and last name equal Fisher. So they all cooperate together. The search box participates in that as well. So if you're searching for Germans whose first name is, and that might be your search text box, it'll actually include that as well. We also have the concept of what we call make, model, year. That's when you might select a make of a car, which could be a Ford or GM or Toyota. And by selecting, say, Toyota, then you get Camry and Prius and so on and so forth. If you select Ford, then you get the Focus and the Escort and the F-150. We call that make, model, year because of kind of how that works. But we have extensive online help on how to do a make, model, year, specific to your database. And the easy way to learn about doing that is to actually take a look at our videos on our video demo page. We have a number of examples on that. So if you just go to video demos in here, bring up that page. Here we go. And a lot of those are in the formula area. So for example, make, model, year using formulas, that's also referred to as dependent drop-down lists. There's various ways to term this, and so that's kind of what I would go look at and read up on, if that's really what you're asking. Maxwell asks, does Iron Speed's roadmap embrace Windows 8 Metro? Yes, we will certainly be a supporter of Windows 8 and SQL Server 2012. If you look at our roadmap page, what you'll find is that we generally release support for any product of Microsoft's that we support within about 3 months after they release their public final shipping for sale release. We don't support betas of other products for obvious reasons, but we're almost always out with our update within 3 months of their final shipping version being released. So rest assured we'll be along probably in our very next version with Windows 8, SQL Server 2012, and support and a few other things. John P. asks, when the Data Sources tab is clicked in the page layout, a list of queries is displayed. Some are designated as not used. Is there a way to delete the unused queries all at once? Deleting them one at a time is very slow. I don't believe there is, but thanks very much. We'll certainly take that under advisement. So that's always good to get feedback like that. Okay, I've answered the easy questions, so we'll switch back to Jim now, who will handle some of the more difficult ones. Jim?
Thanks, Alan. Okay, I've got just a handful of questions here, so we'll go through these pretty quickly. First one from Valerie S. How can you stop the cursor from being the focus on the page when viewed? This is a good question. This may be something else that maybe we want to tweak in the next version. So the search field, you notice, is at the top in version 9.1 pages, and we on all the pages in Iron Speed Designer, I think for quite a few releases, we set the focus on the first field, the first editable field, as a convenience. So, but the new search for text is shown only when you're not in the field. So, so I think this brings up a question here. How do you want things to work? Do you want the user to be able to type something immediately as soon as they open the page, or do you want them to have to click on there? So I think it's kind of a usability trade-off. So this is giving me something to think about. But in terms of changing the behavior, the focus is set through JavaScript. So and actually, your applications that are generated by Iron Speed Designer have a handful of JavaScript files. And so if you look at your application folder, I'm looking at my app 25 here, but it doesn't matter which one. There are 2 JavaScript files here, a small validation one and this web forms one. So the application web forms one has really most of the logic there. So there is some code there for setting focus. So I believe that's where you would go. But I haven't tried to do that myself. But you're welcome to look into this file and customize it. Just be aware that it's not a safe file, in that if you migrate to future versions, you may have to put your changes in that file, or at least incorporate the new changes that we will make. Because in this file, we've made significant enhancements to support the 9.1 functionality. But in any event, the focus code is in there in JavaScript. So. But I think you give me something to think about here. Would we prefer to not have initial focus on any field so you can see the search for? It's just going to require an extra click when someone uses the application. So I will think about that. Next question, Melissa C. I migrated my app from 8.0 to 9.1 and it overwrote my sign-on page. All the customizations I did. Is it normal? Definitely not. It should not change any code customizations. As long as you made them to the correct section in your pages or the correct CSS. There are two CSSs. There's base styles CSS and the styles CSS. So, and this is all covered in the online help. If you're doing customizations, especially code customizations, you really want to look at the introductory sections on that. So here, if we go to the app themes area, for example, we can see base style CSS, where all the stuff is for the 9.1, and here's where you make the CSS changes. Likewise, if we go to the code behinds, you'll see that there's sections. Section 1 is where you put your customization, not 2. Okay, well, I've got some clarification here that I guess was a menu list page, but it shouldn't matter, that it should not be overridden. Now, there are changes to the sign-in security pages that I did not demonstrate here, but we actually improved the layout on them as well in 9.1. So the field layout has been changed. We have some images there, some placeholder images that will show you how your page might look. So, but still, your code customizations, should not be overridden. So that is something that I would encourage you to open a case with support, and so they can find out what's going on. Again, 9.1 has been out for just a week here, so we're still getting feedback from customers on it, but it's been very positive so far. David P. Does the output to Excel feature still use the embedded free library component that is based on XML data formatting, or have you incorporated a better third-party solution? Good question. In 9.0, we did change the library used for Excel exporting, and that's because we had problems with the previous one, that it was not something that was well supported, and I think it did not work in 64-bit environments or something. I mean, there was a major issue there that was addressed with the free library that we introduced in 9.0. Now, there's always trade-offs, and we looked at a lot of different libraries, and one of the trade-offs was the formatting of it was more limited. But that is something that I believe has improved in 9.1. I believe the engineer working on that found that, I think maybe with the newer version of the library, they had improved some things there. And so I think there are some improvements there in 9.1. I don't know if it works exactly like the previous library did. I think it is better overall than what we had prior to 9.0, though. So you probably will see some formatting differences there in 9.1. Next question from Mohammed H. Is it possible to embed an image during exporting a table of records? So our export-import features, like I said earlier, they just do text, numeric, currency, those types of values. They do not do images and other data types. Again, anything is possible with code customization. So that is something that maybe one of our MVPs or someone has done over the years, but that is not something out of the box. And again, that is an area we could, significantly enhance in the product if enough customers wanted that. Again, bring things up with your sales representative, because they have a lot of input into the new features, the new versions. Next question from Lisa C. Just generated a test app, and I'm not getting a clear button for the filters. Is there a setting to hide show that button? This is a good question. I was concerned reading this. I'm assuming we're talking about the reset button for the filters, which I demonstrated, and these are created out of the box, with the out-of-the-box settings. So the question is, why would one not appear? So, you may need to open a case with technical support, but I just want to run through a few possibilities here. The button we're talking about, again, is this button here, Reset Filters, and it's supported both in classic and modern. It has different icon images to fit in, but it essentially works the same way. But it should be created. But the difference is with modern applications, the Reset button is in the Filters pop-up, while the equivalent place in Classic would be with the other buttons. So we didn't want to put Reset Filters here with the other buttons like we did in 9.0, because then it's away from the pop-up. So it's in the Filters area here. But you should see it. So if you don't see it, then that's something to look into. And if you went into the filters area, just to give you an idea of what it looks like on my application, here we go. Here's my reset button. So that's what you should be seeing. If you don't see that, then either there's an option set or there's some bug that we need to look into. Now, in terms of the option, again, if you migrate an application, the application generation options are carried over. So if you had turned off reset buttons somehow for that particular page type, then you would not get reset buttons even after you migrated that application. So that would explain it. But if you hadn't set the option, well, then you should get one. So you might want to look into the option, the settings. And I'm just going to point to you real quickly where the setting would be. So we're going to navigate through the AppGen options tree here. And now note that there's a set of options for each page type. So I don't know which page type we're looking specifically. It's obviously a report, multiple records. And if we come in to, let's see if I can find this, page options, outer panel, table buttons. Here we go. Reset filters. Here we go. You should see a yes here. But again, you need to go to the correct page type. So you can't necessarily tell that from the name of the file. So you should see a yes there. But again, migrating the application would not turn the option off. If anything, when you create new applications, we'll be creating reset filters. So hopefully that'll help you at least see the setting. Again, open up a case if you still have a problem. Next question from Tommy N. And I think this might be the last question. Oh, this is the last of mine. Then I'm going to give it back to Alan, which will be good because I really need to have a drink here. I'm losing my voice. Tommy N. Can you use the horizontal repeater in a detail page? That's what I meant. So, okay, so this is a follow-up on the previous question. So now I think I got it. So it sounds like for the master detail pages, the child parent ones, can the detail, the child, the horizontal repeater, the gallery? And that is a great question. And I still don't know the answer to that one, but now it's much clearer, and that makes perfect sense why you'd want to do that, that you'd want to show gallery as a child. So I will look into that. I'm very curious. I mean, that sounds like an excellent thing for us to do. So I will, again, get back to you on that. Okay, so now I get a little break, and I'll turn it over to Alan a little bit.
Okay, thanks very much, Jim. We're getting down to the short strokes here. We have probably just another half a dozen or so questions. So why don't you consider this the 2-minute warning. If you've got any final questions, please do get those in. Valerie S. asks, does Iron Speed Designer support SQL Express? Yes, we do. I assume you mean Microsoft SQL Server. You can actually see everything that we support if you go to the System Requirements page here. You can access that over here from the left-hand side. And if you go down to the database area, you'll see SQL Express edition and so forth. So we've got all of that detail here that you can see. Viral P asks, can you include more audit options? And I think there's a follow-on. I meant audit the data changed along with the username and time. Yeah, we refer to that as journaling, meaning that you're actually tracking all the different changes. So if a customer changes his address, you might want to record that, what the original one was, what the new one is, and so on and so forth. You can certainly do that in Designer. We don't have that as a built-in feature the way that we will support a lot of built-in audit trails. That is a good feature request, though. We do hear that from time to time, so thanks very much for calling that to our attention. Charlie P. asks, in Iron Speed, can a form be designed that disperses information into multiple tables, i.e. a form that has a job date, customer information, and package selected, and then sends that data to fields in a customer info table, a schedule table, and assigned rep table? Yes, Iron Speed Designer, any particular page can work with multiple tables, including for data entry on a data entry form. And while Designer out of the box typically generates a data entry form per page, if you go over to the toolbox, you will find that there are fields available for you to drag onto that data entry page, that form page, from other tables. The key to this is to make sure you have the foreign key relationships to those other tables declared in your database. So in your example, there is probably a foreign key relationship between the info table, the schedule table, and the assigned rep table. If you have those foreign key relationships in your database declared, Or if you define virtual foreign key relationships in Iron Speed Designer, then those will magically appear in the toolbox. You just drag them onto the page, and what you want, which is dispersing information to multiple tables, will happen automatically. There's nothing more you have to do than just drag those other fields onto the page. A second way to do it is to create a view that incorporates these multiple tables. Iron Speed Designer generates pages for database views the exact same way that it generates pages for regular old tables. So if you happen to have a view that's a composite of multiple tables, which is typically what you do with a view, that'll work straight out of the box as well. Make sure you, in your database, designate that view as OK for updates. A lot of times you have to turn on updates so that those updates pass through the view into the underlying tables, but Designer supports that as well. So two different ways to accomplish the same thing. Okay, we're down to 3 questions now, so I'll take one and then turn it over to Jim for the last 2. So time to get those last questions in. Tommy N asks, and I create my sign-in page graphics, just graphic. I think what you're trying to ask is, can you create your own sign-in page graphics? Yeah, absolutely. The sign-in page and sign-out page and any other page are just normal Iron Speed Designer generated pages. So in version 9.1, for example, we put some humorous graphics on the sign-in page. We don't expect you to keep the pictures of little Billy in there. We expect you to replace them with your own. Those are just images. You can just put those onto your page the same way that we did. It's actually quite simple to do that through the layout editor. So yeah, absolutely replace those images with whatever makes sense for your application. Okay, I'll turn it over to Jim now for the last 2 questions.
Thanks, Alan. Okay, yeah, I just have 2 questions here, so we're going to wrap up. So first one, when you customize the text changed event, the cursor moves to the first field on the screen. Do you need to use the technique you just mentioned to control this? That's from John P. I don't fully understand that first part there about customizing the text change. It sounds like he's getting into maybe another case that might be handled. You know, we're just really talking about the initial focus. I think that's the only place where the problem would be. So, and there's probably multiple ways you could do this. You know, you might be able to do it, you know, at the .NET level to trigger the client side behavior. Actually, what I would do, I mean, one way would be to try and, you know, change the determination of the first field, which is what I was looking at in the JavaScript before. Another way would be simply, as late as possible, to do a window.focus, open close parentheses. So that would set focus on the window itself as opposed to a text box. So, but there might still be initial focus on the text field. So, so that there are a few ways you could do this. But, you know, again, this is kind of like a technical support case here. It's kind of hard to give you a definitive solution, you know, without actually trying this stuff out. So I'm, you know, trying to give you kind of my best guess possible. But, you know, when you go open a technical support case, the engineers actually try these things out, you know, before they tell you or they've done them in the past. So, so I hope that's at least enough guidance on that. And actually, I thought about this. You know, maybe we don't want to set the initial focus on that field, but you know, that's going to mean an extra click for all the customers using the pages. Next question is from Viral P. Viral P. This is a feature question. Also, can you focus on web services? Really good question. That is an area we do have customers asking about, and we realize that in today's world, lots of people are integrating with other libraries over a network through web services. That's the way to do it. You don't use DCOM and Corba, you know, for crying out loud. I mean, you don't use that stuff. You're using web services these days. So we realize that. And you can do web services with Iron Speed Designer, and particularly calling other web services. And if you look at the code customization wizard, there is a section on that. I'm not going to go into the details, but I want to point out it to you. The code customization, by the way, is a series of examples, sample code that you can look at. It will even insert the code into your application after you provide some parameter information. But it will not maintain that code for you. It's still your own custom code. So it's very handy if you're a programmer, you know, to get started on this stuff. But you know, if you're not a programmer, you may just want to look at it as a reference. So there's a section here on web services down there that talk about how to call your web services. Now, we don't know about your specific web services. I mean, those are going to be, specific to your enterprise. So that's not something that I think we would do something with. But maybe in the future we could provide easier integration for a web service. Just like we do for databases, provide an IP address and a bunch of information to connect to it. We could provide something similar for web services and have a discovery mechanism, where we, let you call your functions directly. So I can envision a feature like that going into the product in the future. We just would have to see how many customers would be interested in that type of feature. But you can definitely call web services today. You just need to do some custom coding for it, and it's really not that complex. But again, if you're looking for additional support in that area, please contact your sales representative. And that was the last question I had. I'm going to turn it back to Alan for, I guess, the very last question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jim. I think we're down now to 2 questions here. So the first from Maxwell is, could you please share the webinar slides? Yes, we will. We'll also try to post a video of this presentation, so in case you want to listen to any of the Q&A or rewatch any of the presentation, you can do that. We'll try to have that out on the website within the next couple of days and perhaps get the webinar slides out a little bit quicker than that. Maxwell also asked, does Iron Speed Designer have messaging functionality? I'm not quite sure what you mean by messaging, so let me answer that question a few different ways, and hopefully we'll get at whatever you were asking. We have an emailing capability, so you can actually use the button action wizard to connect an email that gets sent out when certain actions occur, typically clicking a button. That's why it's tied to the button action wizard. So you can send an email that's basically the contents of any Iron Speed Designer generated page. Pages can be used as emails. And so when you click a button, that data-driven page gets sent out as an HTML email out to folks. Or it can just be simple text email, but I think the more visual, graphical HTML pages are a little more interesting. So it does that. If you mean some other type of messaging like web services, then you can use our code customization wizard, which has a web services facility in there to add a web services call, to your application, or perhaps you mean some other type of messaging. So hopefully that's answered your question. It looks like we might have just, nope, I think that is probably the final question here. So I want to thank all of you for asking such great questions and keeping us on our feet for the last hour and a half. We hope you enjoyed the demo of version 9.1 and even more that you are enjoying the new page layout functionality and improved application speed of version 9.1. With that, I want to thank you all for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you back here very, very soon. Thanks, and have a great